Good morning, friends. Welcome to Gyan channel. Let's come to Unit 5, that is Effects of Mass Communication. Mass communication as an agent of social change. The comprehensive use of communication tools in development programs started with World War II and developed in different directions in various geographic, cultural, social, and economic contexts. Several communication models have been around since 1950s based on academic exercises and field practices. Models have developed concurrently in opposition to each other, often with marked and inconcilable differences, though in recent years there has been a trend towards the gap closing and leading towards convergence. Two main trends have dominated 5 decades of development communication. Firstly, communication models inspired by modernization theories and techniques derived from the information strategies used by the US government during World War II and by the industrial sector struggling to position its post war products. Secondly, communication approaches that emerged in the heat of the social and political struggle against colonial and dictatorial powers imposed on third world countries, which have their conceptual reference point in the dependency theories. Both major currents, that are modernization and social participation, have evolved concurrently for several decades, often in open confrontation on the theoretical level as well as in social applications. During 90s, however, some elements of convergence appeared in models that combine the use of mass media with educational and participatory approaches. At the beginning of the century, communication for social change appears as the paradigm and recovers and deepens the path that participatory, alternative, and development and communication had cleared, while also integrating progressive features from current modernization models. Now we talk about education and entertainment. The marriage between social marketing and entertainment gave rise to the model known as edutainment, or we can say intereducation, which, because of its flexibility and capacity for adaptation to local cultural context, has been successful in some centuries. Edutainment applies the techniques of the spectacle in the field of awareness raising, and education. The communicational strategies of edutainment combines melodramatic soap operas for radio and television, pop songs, theater, printed stories, attractive posters, all complemented with components of interpersonal communication and the close link between communicational actions and the health services. Even though the roots of this model are in the United States in campaigns against tobacco and alcoholism or for environmental protection or the use of safety belts, in fact, it has developed in other countries where the model is used for health programs, aids, or family planning. One of the most interesting aspects of the model is that it has contributed to the organization of groups of young people and women in relation to the most common elements in the strategy, such as reproductive health, and they have become promoters and communicators who expand the radius of influence of the communicational process. In this model, one of the most important challenges is to maintain a balance between the contents and the techniques of entertainment used. How much education is there and how much distraction? A lot of evaluations are biased because they need to show evidence of success in order to justify new fundings. But beyond that, it is difficulty of creating spectacles and messages which have an educational value or which are complementary to the educational process which takes place immediately afterwards and should involve dialogue and debate. Now we talk about communication for development. One of the best structured model is that what is called communication for development, whose main promoter from the beginning of the 1970s was the Food and Agricultural Organization. We call it FAO also. In some aspects, communication for development was inspired by a dissemination of innovations model. Both were in the field of experimenting the rural universe and both promoted instruction of technology for improving agricultural production. Another different aspect of communication for development is the emphasis on training in communication techniques for the agents of change and the production of appropriate materials for cultural context in each program. Now we talk about communication for social change. Communication for social change is the most recent paradigm of the ones described above. Its theoretical formulation only started in 1997 with a series of meetings that the Rockefeller Foundation organized to discuss the role of communication in social change. The central defining concept of communication for social change has been expressed in the following ways. CFSC is a process of CFSC is the short form of communication for social change. It is the process of dialogue and debate based on tolerance, respect, social justice, and active participation of all those involved. The driving forces of communication for social change can be synthesized as follows. Sustainability of social changes is certain when individuals and communities affected require ownership of the communication process and contents. Communication for social change is horizontal and it strengthens community bonds by amplifying the voices of the poorest. Communities should be the protagonists of their own change and manage their communication tools. The results of the CFSC process must go beyond individual behavior and consider social norms, current policies, culture, and the general development context. CFSC strives to strengthen cultural identity, trust, commitment, voice, ownership, and generally community empowerment. It rejects the linear model of information transmission from a central center to the individual receiver and promotes instead a cylindrical process of interactions focused on shared knowledge and collective action. Now we talk about five essential conditions, that is community participation and ownership. Too many communication projects, the context of development have failed due to lack of participation and commitment from the subjects of change. Access to mass media has proved insufficient and has often resulted in manipulations with vested interests. Therefore, one of the main CFFC conditions is participation and ownership of the communication process and contents. Second is language and cultural relevance. For several decades, development programs were imposed on third world nations while communication strategies were designed in the laboratories of industrialized countries. The same models, messages, formats, and techniques were utilized and still are today in distinct cultural contexts. The communication process cannot ignore or deny the specificity of each culture and language. On the contrary, it will support them in to acquire legitimacy. Cultural interaction or the exchanges between languages and cultures is healthy when it happens within a framework of equity and respect through critical dialogue, debate on ideas, and solidarity. Next is generation of local contents. Vertical models of communication for development take for granted the fact that poor communities in developing nations lack knowledge. Communication for social change strengthens local knowledge and promotes exchanges in equal terms, learning through dialogue in a process of mutual growth. Next is use of appropriate technology. Fascination with technological innovation, often presented as the sine qua non condition for development, can lead to greater dependency. Many projects failed because they were equipped with technology that people were unable to pay for, renew, and control. Communication for social change promotes processes, not technologies. Next, network for convergence. Communication processes that isolate themselves, do not establish dialogue with similar experiences, are less likely to grow and be sustainable. CFSC promoted dialogue and debate not only within the community but also towards similar processes. Networking contributes to strengthening the process and exchange add richness to them. Now we talk about demassification, demystification, decentralization, and convergence. First of all, we talk about demassification. The demystification of media simply refers to the restructuring of media industry into smaller independent operating entities. This is course cuts across the major mass media, print, film, and broadcast media. With the arrival of new technologies and increased market segmentation, the power and influence of those second wave media has increased extensively and the part of 20th century. Radio's influence has example diminished through the years with the advent of MTV, a music video cable channel launched in the 1980s, to MP3 in 1990s, and more recently by the Apple iPod in the early 21st century. Similarly, television's mass audience has also been splintered by the arrival of cable and satellite television and its myriad channels serving different splintered audiences. Electronic video recording and electronic games in the 1980s to the internet, DVDs, and computers online games. The same vein, print media, especially newspaper and magazines, have suffered a progressive decline in circulation over the years in most countries worldwide, especially today with the advent of the internet. In addition, young people especially are turning out altogether, preferring the more visual and entertaining distractions offered by TV and the interactivity that is inherent in the internet. They see newspapers as old, tiring, boring, predictable, predictable and as preachy as their parents are. Now we talk about decentralization. A major media consolidation deals bring more and more publishing houses into private hands. The challenges of converting these properties that can respond to the needs of the Nike markets are becoming more acute. Combining infrastructure and staffs cannot be the only factor leading to more success in publishing markets that are by their nature highly decentralized. Is a gap in management skills, industry outlook, and strategic vision in publishing companies that is going to be hard to fill without confronting the waves of users who are eager to create their own decentralized media markets. In the wake of these opposing forces of consolidation and diversification, content producers need to think carefully about how they are going to position themselves for profitability moving forward. A few quick suggestions: keep the focus on content, not distribution. An acquisition like YouTube doesn't come along all that often, and when it does, there is the temptation to think that you are buying a distribution channel. But user generated media is a very movable feast, able to switch at will to the next interesting channel. A channel it is, but one that's highly independent of the content producers using it. By contrast, CBS News, which has been making aggressive use of YouTube as a venue, is thriving by trying to get content into the hands of new audiences in a venue that they value. Media companies need to think along similar lines where possible and think more about how they can be leading producers of content in user centric venues. Keep the focus on adding user content to Nike markets. While the emphasis of late has been on the glory deals that lead to major consolidation groups, these mega deals are not necessarily going to lead to mega solutions for publishers' problems. At the heart, the online revolution is about developing highly valuable content for Nike audiences, out of which can grow the enthusiasm for more widespread distribution of content when you are faced with legions of user publishers whose motivations for putting out great content may be far more complex than the typical ad supported media outlet. It's going to be harder and harder to find an editorial focus and can outrun targeted communities of users already empowered to communicate with one another. Instead, learn how to help them run with one another, one Nike at a time. Now keep the focus on getting the right leadership. At a recent media industry committee meeting, surprised to hear some of the veteran industry insiders campaigning that Recent industry event panelists had been a little too quick to pat one another on the back and avoid some of the real pressing issues facing media companies. Surprise was not that it was happening, the fizzling in the dark has been all too evident for years now, but that industry leaders are challenging publishing companies to embrace the challenges confronting them. Entrenched media management teams must look beyond the next round of backslapping events with colleagues and think about who is really in touch with the distributed market and they need to conquer. Next, we talk about media convergence. Gutenberg era is over. A new digital communication technology has emerged. Electronic superhighways is beginning to griddle the globe as voice, video, and data convergence, bringing in their wake a new basket of digital multimedia and interactive communication technologies. But it is not just the technologies that concern us, it is the social change that accompanies the technology that must be our prime concern. New technologies are doing much more. They are changing the way we live, the way we work, relax, manage our money, trade, and communicate with each other. New technologies are changing the way we appreciate people, cultures, countries, companies, and our expectation of them, and also our expectation of ourselves. India on the threshold of convergence. The convergence in India has arrived faster than expected. Convergence would help in webcasting, video on demand, and internet via cable. Much awaited delivery of internet through cable network has already started in Delhi and Mumbai. The optical fiber cable carries more bandwidth, resulting in more signals being carried with superior clarity. Cable companies are expected to rule the roost due to investments made by them in the cable networks. The upgradation of cable network, the MTNL proposes tough competition for all the players as it can pump the broadband network on its existing network at a very low cost. Cable operators deliver the cable and satellite channels to the consumers. With more and more channels going pay to air would open up subscription revenues for the broadcasters. In future it will emerge a major source of revenue and much larger than the advertisement revenue. The channel will be carried on two platforms, direct to operator and direct to home. Both the services have user addressability in era of convergence. Increasing competitive environment in multimedia industry promises tremendous user benefits through increased savings in time, greater choice, and the explosion of innovative services and products. The development of multimedia services will not replace judgment value that is provided by the traditional media, and the traditional media will still have a large role to play in the new multimedia world. Multimedia has the potential to vastly increase the range of services available and offer its users a larger choice of applications, but new technology alone will not ensure success. It is the people who use it who will decide the future of multimedia. Users wants and needs how they will manage the flood of options and above all whether or not they will pay for freedom of choice or what counts. Now we talk about convergence, technological and institutional. Convergence has become a click of the information age. In its current usage, it refers to two distinct though related phenomena. The way that all transmission media become bit carriers so that different network platforms can carry similar kinds of services, and the tendency of the previously separate worlds of broadcasting, film, telecommunication, publishing, and computing to become involved in each other's business. Recent examples of new convergent services include services delivered to TV sets via systems like web TV, email, and World Wide Web, access via digital TV, decoders, and mobile telephones, using internet for voice telephony. Demystification information theory. Over the years, many contributors have been made to the field of communication theory. For example, 1928, Arviel Hartley published a paper titled Transmission of Information, and in 1946, Danish government published a paper titled Theory of Communication. In 1948, Claude Shannon published the new famous paper titled The Mathematical Theory of Communication. Paper was first published in two parts in July and October edition of the Bell System Technology Technical Journal. Since then, communication theory and information theory, as it is sometimes called, has become an accepted field of research. Following discussions has already partly derived from the second edition of the book Science of Information Theory by Leon Blois, as well as from the book An Introduction to Information Theory by John R. Price. Before we proceed, it's important to note that we must not confuse ordinary use of word information with the word information in information theory. The latter is called Shannon information, which is narrowly defined. Sometimes authors use the ordinary word for information as it word information for information theory means the same thing. It is too often occurs within the same article and has become a problem in certain bodies of literature. The same is true for word entropy. That is, authors will sometimes use the word entropy without saying whether they are talking about thermodynamic entropy or Shannon entropy, and vice versa. The following discussion is the attempt to clarify these as well as other problems in this area. Now we talk about communication theory. Communication theory, there are three basic elements in transmitter, the channel and the receiver. For example, a person who writes a letter is the transmitter, the postal system is the channel, and of course the person we receive with letter is the receiver. Same can be said for cell phone, text messaging, email, and whole host of other examples. With respect to communication information theory, each transmitter is generally viewed as a source of finite number of messages. The content of each message doesn't matter. For example, if a message source is only capable of sending two messages, it doesn't matter whether one of the message contains random letters and the other contains a grammatically correct sentence. The question then becomes, what is the scope of information theory? Information theory is only concerned with which message is sent out to a group of messages. That is, the more message that a message source is capable of transmitting, the more uncertain the receiver can be about which particular message will be sent. The more certain the receiver is about which message is sent, the more information there is. Note that the length of a message can be one symbol long or several symbols in long with no impact on the amount of Shannon information. We have shown that the ordinary use of word information is much different from the word information in information theory. We have also explained that thermodynamic entropy and entropy of information theory are the same in terms of increasing randomness. Nevertheless, these words also have different meanings when narrowed to specifics. With respect to information theory, it doesn't matter whether the content of a message is random or recognizable because the average number of bits is the same. Moreover, words information, entropy, and uncertainty are synonyms and correspond to increasing randomness or uncertainty as the number of bits increase, that is, in the non average cases. Alternatively, the more we constrain a system or more certainly there is about the outcome. This increase in certainty always corresponds to a decrease in Shannon information. Moreover, this decrease is said to represent the advanced information. Now we talk about type of audiences, elite, general, and special. Most interesting for this analysis is the remarkable parallel between political, corporate, and media elite positions on international affairs and North-South relations, as it was for gender, race, and class discussed earlier. Again, it should be asked whether this consensus is voluntary or imposed by one of these major elite groups. There is evidence that in many situations the news media have been persuaded, manipulated, or even coerced to follow political views on international affairs. Disinformation campaigns, financial incentives, subtle threats, or retaliation may combine with consensual political outlooks among journalists and politicians in the construction of preferred interpretations of the current political situation in the world. The same is the case through less openly and more indirectly for the collusion between media and corporate business and its interests. A relationship in which multinational corporations often have more or less direct access to the boardrooms and hence indirectly to the newsrooms of mainstream media. Advertising only one of the strategic means to keep editorial opinion in such multinationals within the boundaries of acceptable dissent. Indeed, one of the Western mainstream media advocate economic or financial policies that are fundamentally at variance with the basic tenets of Western corporate enterprise. Similarly, serious critical inquiry into the activities of such corporations in the South are virtually absent in the Western press. Exceptions confirm this general rule that are limited to the convergence of catastrophes such as oil spills, major accidents in plants, or threats to the interests of Western investors or stockholders. On the other hand, the mainstream news media are far from passive onlookers, let alone defenseless victims of political or corporate control and manipulation. With their specific access to the means of influencing public opinion, they may put pressure on politicians and corporate managers. That is, on the context of press theory, it is also the potential power. Sometimes it exercises such power when other elite groups also oppose prevailing policies, as was the case in the latter stages of the war in Vietnam. That the news media generally do not act as major opponents of political or corporate policies and interests is not between because of their power. It's true that because many journalists tend to be liberal, opposition in the Western press is not uncommon as far as specific conservative policies and actions of governments or businesses are concerned. Such criticism suggests freedom and independence of the media. However, such challenges remain within the flexible but clear borders of dissent set by editorial policies of newspaper organizations whose basic ideologies are in agreement with those of the other power elites. International business is seriously hampered by bad policy or by firm state antagonism. The shared elite interests favor the development of related ideological positions, as is also the case for the role of similar socialization education, class background, gender, ethnicity, or political orientation of most elite groups. It is the reproduction of this elite dominance that also explains virtually all structures and strategies of new production and news reports of the media. Now we talk about characteristics of audience. In a place with several radio or TV stations, the station with the largest audience share will also have the greatest average duration of use. This is known as the double jeopardy effect. Stations with a smaller audience often like to think through our audience is small, it's though our audience is small, it's very loyal. Our audience members spend most of their time with our station. Sadly, this is hardly ever true. The audience to a less popular station nearly always spends more time with more popular station. To understand this action, it will help you to know the mathematical relationship between average audience, cumulative audience, and duration. The average audience over any time period is the cumulative audience times the average duration divided by the length of the time period. If you know two of these three figures, you can easily calculate the other. For example, a TV station has 1 million viewers in the course of a week, and this was the station for average of 10 hours during the week. If the station is always on air, the average viewer is watching by 10 by 168th of the week, so the average audience is 1 by 160th of 1 million, that is 59,500. When an average audience changes, the cumulative audience usually changes with it. In other words, when a station's audience increases, two things happen together. New people start viewing, the previous viewers stay for longer. When the audience falls, the opposite happens. This is another aspect of double jeopardy effect. Stations often want to survey their potential audience so that these people can be converted into actual audience. However, a current Audience and a potential audience are the group of people, not two. Think of them all standing in the line. At one end are the people who listen to your station as often as they can and never to another station. At the other end are people who listen to your station perhaps once in a few months and perhaps not willingly. My surveys in Australia have shown that when a station's audience grows, this is usually because occasional listeners have begun to listen more often. It is rare for a non listener to suddenly become a constant listener except when another station is a market in a market closes down or totally changes its programming. Therefore, the best way to increase your audience is to get occasional listener to tune in more often and for longer periods. When people take some action, there are usually several reasons. Every station has competitors, even if it doesn't think so. The competitors are not only other radio or TV stations, but anything which competes for people's time. Most people are either lethargic or loyal to their radio listening, spending most of their listening time on just one station. This is not true for TV, where most people watch most of the available channels. The penetration of the product is the percentage of households that have the product, such as a TV, a radio, a telephone. Penetration levels rise slowly at first, accelerate as the figures approaches 50%, slow down as the penetration rises. If you make a graph showing how penetration increases over time, you find that it's an S curve which looks something like this. Another example of S curve is the Pareto principle, sometimes called the 80-20 law. This is expressed by statements such as the keenest 20% of our listeners do 80% of listening to our stations. Therefore, at least keen 80% of the listener would do only 20% of the listening. These figures are often close to 80 and 20, but to call it radio, a law overstates its accuracy. However, 80% of the activity is usually done by between 10% and 25% of the people who do that activity. One exception is newspapers sold mainly by subscription, where the spread of readership is much more even. Most people prefer the status quo. If the status quo changes, preferences change to match it after a while. Often it's better to survey reaction to change better. The status quo has had time to settle down. Around 3 to 6 months after the program change. Questions about what times people prefer specific programs to be broadcast always produce messy answers. Most people don't care what type of program they hear at what time, as long as they like that type of program. The status quo problem also applies if they are unsure about when they would like to hear or see a program. Many people will choose the status quo not because they strongly prefer it, but because they have no complaint. For many people, radio is a small and unimportant part of their lives, even though they may spend several hours a day listening to it. But they are usually doing something else while they listen. Radio, most of them place more importance on television. If you ask people who have both radio and TV, if you had to do without radio or TV, which one would you choose to keep? Most people choose TV. But if you ask which is most important to you, radio or television, the numbers are about equally divided between radio and TV. The users of media service have usually been around for much longer than most of the staff who work there. Therefore, what seems new to the staff may not be so for the audience. Some media have seasonal trends in their use and others don't. TV being often much higher in winter than in summer, but radio listening is much more stable throughout the year. Units of thinking, people think of themselves as watching individual programs on TV but whole stations on radio. Attempts to transfer the other way of thinking on the other medium have generally been unsuccessful. Thus, radio stations have larger audiences when they don't have a sequence of unrelated programs, while TV stations that have the same sort of program most of the time also get small audiences. Now we talk about limitations of mass communication. Firstly, we talk about physical limitations, linguistic, semantic limitations, psychological limitation, emotional limitation, cultural, religious limitation, literary, educational labels, noise, organizational, structural limitation, and perceptions. These all are physical limitations. We talk about technical limitations. These are technical capacity of the communicator, signals, oblique electronic noise, improper instruments, technical faults, and improper listening. The organizational limitations are professionalization. Substantial media specialists have a negative effect because masses are institutions providing guided by criteria efficient. Turn the sensational newspaper, distorted perceptions of real world, create models false, bad. The public is exposed but not able to select the process information. The message, however objective, is distorted since the source is a bias, is has a bias. Most effects, depending on the nature of cognitive, affective, and behavioral, can easily introduce or induce certain types of public misinformation. Produce changes, facilitate or strengthen the opinions or beliefs that may be wrong, dangerous, social, etc. Handles audiences by changing changing contextuality and event, news, etc. Gentlemen, with this come to end of this session. Thank you. I hope you got valuable information. Thank you, Jai.